All right, we are live on YouTube and I'm going to start broadcasting this webinar.
Great, thanks.
All right, we are broadcasting and people are joining us now.
All right, thank you.
All right, we are live on YouTube and I'm going to start broadcasting.
Welcome everybody who is joining us. We will be starting promptly at 9:30, but for now, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and make sure that your setting is to all panelists and attendees. Welcome everybody who's joining us. As you hop on, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Please make sure that you say to all panelists and attendees. We'll be starting promptly at 9:30. Thank you to those of you who are introducing yourself in the chat and choosing to all panelists and attendees. Welcome. We'll be starting shortly. Hey, it's 9:30 now, and I would like to go ahead and get started. Welcome to everybody who has joined us this morning. We have a wonderful presenter who's joining us, but before I introduce her, I should let you know that I'm the host on the call today. My name is Stephanie Eichley Chang. I work in the Lurie College of Education for San Jose State, and also co-hosting will be Brian Chung Dooley, and he is our communications coordinator here in the college, and he is amazing, and he'll be helping us out. We have here today, Emma Pass, and she's coming to us from Fort Collins, Colorado, and she teaches at a very interesting school. She'll tell you more about her setup. It's a hybrid situation, and she has become kind of one of our experts, I think, in this time of the pandemic. So we'll hear a little bit more from her after I go over the announcements. Okay, announcements. So a recording of this event will be available afterwards, and that'll be sent out by Brian to all of you. So you'll be able to go back and access the slides. And I think probably Brian will be dropping the link to the slides in the chat as well. Captions will be available for the recording, and that link will also be dropped in the chat. All of your video and audio are automatically turned off today. We have such a large audience that if you could just keep the questions and put them into the Q&A and address things in the chat, I'll be trying to read and moderate from there, and Emma will be able to stop a few times and answer some of the questions. If you do raise your hand on this, unfortunately, we're not able to unmute today because we have such a large audience. So I think that's about it for the announcement. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Emma. Emma, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and just start sharing my screen so you can see my slides. Give me one moment. Alrighty, here we go. Welcome to my session today. I'll introduce myself in the next few slides. This is Rethinking Assessment for the Google generation. My intention for this session is that we talk a little bit about big picture ideas in terms of what assessment means, why we assess students, and kind of our philosophy behind that. And then also some small picture in terms of looking at specific tools about how you can do assessment for remote instruction. It'll also be a bit of a hands-on session today. I always try and practice what I preach. So when I'm in the classroom, I'm trying to limit my direct instruction to 15-minute chunks and then having my students do some sort of hands-on activity to keep them engaged in the session. So I'm going to try and have you do that with me today as well, practicing some of what we'll be talking about, exploring some of these tools. I'll be dropping links for you in the chat box. So you will follow a link, do a little activity, and then you'll always come back to our Zoom meeting to kind of rejoin the group after we're done with the hands-on. We'll give it a try. Typically, when I'm doing training online, my sessions are a little bit smaller, so I've kind of been a little creative in terms of how to accommodate a big group, and we'll see how it goes. The other thing I will say is that you will have a link to these slides. When I do these online trainings, I try and give as much information as I possibly can, because I find that teachers are joining me on a whole spectrum of where they are. Some people are really new to online tools and learning, and it can feel like a lot for them. So for those people, I just remind you, take any pressure off to remember everything I say today. This session is being recorded. You have my resources in these slides. Try to capture one thing that you think you can use, implement that in your classroom, and then come back to the video or come back to the slides and try and pick up something new. So for those people, it might feel a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. Don't worry, you can always come back and do more. And then for other people who maybe are really accustomed to using some of these tech tools, I try and give a lot of information so that everybody gets at least one new thing. In that are my slides, I'll just show you and mention at the bottom here. In the notes are all of my sources as well as resources. So if I ever mention during the session today, you'll be able to find a link to that. All of those are going to be down here in the notes from my slides. All righty. So a little bit more about me. My name is Emma Pass. I can be found on Twitter. I don't know if anybody's on Twitter, but it's a really amazing resource for educators who are kind of sharing ideas and best practices and a lot about educational technology. So for sure, if you're on Twitter, you can find me there. And if you're not on Twitter, I highly recommend it. There's a really great community of educators. I am a part-time ed tech trainer, so I do this. Typically it was in person, but now doing a lot of online training for teachers. I am Google certified educator, trainer, and innovator. So a lot of the products that I prefer are Google based, not just because I'm kind of indoctrinated into the whole Google system, but I really prefer those tools and I use them in my classroom. This is my little logo down here. I am a 7th and 8th grade English teacher, and I work at kind of an interesting school. This is our building here. It's called PSD Global Academy in Fort Collins, Colorado. We are a public K-12 hybrid school. And what that means is our students are hybridizing where they're doing their learning. So part of it is in the school building, and then part of it is at home. Pre-pandemic, this is what my schedule looked like. We had our students coming to campus on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they participate in what is really kind of traditional education. They go to their periods and lunch and PE, and it looks like most other schools. But then on Mondays and Fridays, they stay home and they're doing their learning remotely online. So using a lot of the tools that I'll be talking about today to deliver that instruction online. And then Wednesdays was kind of a hybrid day within hybrid, where they had the option to come to campus in the morning for individual support and small group, and then completing the day at home online. I like to start by talking about my schedule just so I can pre-teach a couple of terms that I think are important when we talk about teaching online. When we talk about teaching online, we're talking usually about one of two methods. The first is synchronous learning, meaning we're all learning together at the same time. This is what we do in the classroom, but it's also what we're doing right now over Zoom, right? I'm doing the teaching and you're all receiving the instruction together at the same time. And then asynchronous learning is the other style, meaning students are accessing their work all at different times, completing it at their own pace, and just learning at different times. So these are the two terms that I'll kind of talk about today when I talk about online teaching. After coronavirus, our schedule stayed mostly the same, in that those Tuesdays and Thursday days where our students used to come to the school building and engage in live synchronous learning, we've just adapted that to online synchronous learning. So instead of coming to a classroom, they're now coming to a Google Meet or a Zoom session. And then the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're posting work for students for them to complete asynchronously. So when I talk about some of our assessment tools today, I might mention this would be a great tool for synchronous learning, or this would be a great tool for students to access asynchronously. The other two terms I think it's important to kind of review at the beginning of our session today, especially because we're talking about assessment, is the difference between formative and summative assessment. Formative being the smaller type assessments that we use to inform ongoing learning process, typically informing us as teachers about how we need to proceed, what students are understanding and what they're not, versus summative assessment, typically thought of as unit tests, end of year exam, high stake testings, used to assess how much a student has learned over the course of a period of time. And that brings us into really the topic of the session today, which is assessing students remotely. And before we jump in, I like to address that big elephant in the room, which is, of course, Google. When we're assessing students, we're looking for what they know and understand. And when we're assessing students remotely, when they're at home on devices, how can we ensure that what we're assessing is actually coming from the student and not from a Google search of infinite knowledge and information? So the question we're asking ourselves today is there an easy way to ensure that students won't cheat on an assessment at home? They won't use Google to get that information from. And unfortunately, the answer is no. There is no easy way to ensure that that won't happen. So that's why this isn't a 15-minute session, but instead a 90-minute session, because we need to kind of rethink assessment to address this. This Google so much access to so much information. So when we're rethinking remote assessment, I'm going to talk about this in two parts today. The first being traditional assessment. And when I say traditional, I'm really talking about kind of quiz or test style assessment, short answer, multiple choice, versus some alternative models that we might consider. I also think it's important to note that I don't think one is better than the other. I won't advocate for only using traditional models or only using alternative models because we're now in a remote environment, but instead maybe adopting a combination of both. Starting with traditional assessment models, I want to start again with that kind of big picture thinking through the lens of how do we do traditional assessment with the Google generation. And I have three kind of tips or ideas for you. Create new measures for security and accountability, to build a system where students are actually taking their assessment from their own knowledge, right? It's a pretty secure environment. Either we're having them do it on a pen and paper, and we're watching for students who are using notes or looking around the room, or we're having students take assessments on devices and we're watching their screens, walking around the room, and even the students who are really fast at switching windows and hiding tabs don't really have that great of an opportunity to use Google on those assessments. So in my hybrid model, my traditional hybrid model, if there was any big summit assessment where I was really looking for student understanding, I would typically save those for an in-person day because it's just the most secure kind of avenue for making sure students are doing those assessments. However, when we're doing this online, we have a couple of options for security. One thing I do is sometimes I'll have my students take that assessment with me live online, meaning on those synchronous online learning days, the Tuesdays and Thursdays, when they come to Google Meet or come to Zoom, I'll have them all take their assessment within that hour. So they're logged on to Google Meet. I can give them the instructions, any reminders about the assessment, have them go to a tool, and I'll talk about some of these tools later, like Google Forms or Go Formative, where I can kind of monitor them as they take that assessment. And I can give reminders to the class verbally over Zoom or Google Meet if it looks like they need any, or I can private message a student if I'm seeing anything kind of odd through that hour as they're taking their assessment live online. Does this work perfectly as a security measure? Definitely not. But it gives this kind of feel of maybe more of a traditional in-class assessment where you're all taking it together at the same time. I'll also mention that in my pre-pandemic hybrid model, like I mentioned, I would have my students take those assessments live in person, but inevitably there would always be several students who were absent that day. So one thing I would do is I would schedule a one-on-one time to meet with those students on Google Meet, ask them to share their screen as they took the assessment, and I would just turn off my camera and microphone and kind of sit quietly in the background. And the student feels that increased accountability because their screen is being shared and they know I can see what they're doing as they take that assessment. Finally, you might consider using a computer monitoring program like GoGuardian or Landshark. Plenty of schools and districts subscribe to these programs where you have this kind of increased ability to see what your students are doing on their screen. This is a little screenshot example from GoGuardian, where you can see the teacher has the option to view any class period, and their devices are all kind of registered to this program. So for an individual student's name, you can also see their screen there in the background. So again, similar to having a student share their screen over Zoom or Google Meet, you could see the screens of multiple students as they take the exam. Again, does this mean that the student doesn't have their phone in their lap or a second device sitting next to them or even talking to a sibling at home? No, these are all just methods for maybe increasing the feeling of security with an exam. I personally would not rely solely on security measures for remote assessment. They are not perfect, and there are a lot of ways to get around them. So if your students are feeling like you're trying to police their online assessment, I think they would feel maybe more incentive to figure out how to get around those security measures because it's pretty easy to do. Instead, I would focus on these next two tips. First, building a system where students don't feel the need to cheat. So asking ourselves, why do students cheat in the first place? And I think typically it comes from this pressure of a high stakes test or project where they feel like they only have one shot, and this pressure of the grade as a kind of measure of their ability and success. So, right, we're putting all this pressure on exams and grades and projects to kind of encourage students to do whatever it takes to get there. How I've addressed this in my classrooms is I have a policy where all work can be redone or revised. That includes formative assessment like quizzes, it includes homework, it includes projects, it includes more summative style assessment like end of unit exams. My personal philosophy is that everything is formative because the learning process never stops. My job as an educator is to teach my students. And sometimes the best way to learn is by our mistakes. So taking a piece of work, learning from our mistakes, redoing and revising becomes really powerful learning. And then this system also really works for me because I can always give my students that incentive before a test or before a project to say, hey, no pressure, you can redo this or revise this. So if you're feeling the urge to cheat or plagiarize to get a good grade, take that pressure off, because the consequences of that will be way worse than the reality of just redoing or revising something that you don't, do the best you possibly could have. Giving students that power to always have control of their grades. If you're listening to that and thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds like a lot of work, here were my 3 biggest worries before I implemented this policy with my students. One, I was worried that students would try less the first time around, that they wouldn't put the effort into the project or they wouldn't study for the exam because they knew that they could redo it later. I was worried that it would create way more work for me as the teacher if students were always returning things in. And I was worried that every student would have 100% in my class because they all redid everything. The reality is none of these are actually really causes for concerns in my experience. I found that students don't want to redo their work, so they often try as hard as they would on that first go. The work that it created for me in regrading revised work was actually just diverted from, instead of kind of creating follow-ups for students who didn't do well on those exams, I was instead investing more time on giving feedback and having them work on the revised work. So it's just kind of a different kind of work than I used to do. And then not everyone had 100% in my class. There are definitely a couple who really want that 100% grade and will work to revise and redo absolutely everything for it. But a lot of students just are happy with their grades where they are, and don't put that extra effort in to revise and redo all that work. Finally, that is kind of leading into my final kind of big picture idea when we're talking about traditional assessment model, and that is to develop a culture where students don't want to cheat. I do this in a couple of different ways. It's definitely part of creating a classroom environment that's based on mutual respect and trust, and then also setting up a lot of norms and procedures. So emphasizing knowledge over grades, right? Really explaining the why. I start every year a lesson called Why English Matters, and I really try and emphasize that everything we do in class has a purpose for the success in their future lives and future careers, and de-emphasizing the grade as a measure for success, and really trying to emphasize you will need this skill, and here is why. Here's exactly how you can use and apply this skill later in your life. You might consider including students into the conversation. So when you're having your students set up their norms and expectations for the year, include them in that conversation of why academic honesty is important, and maybe even consider creating an honor council for students to kind of hold each other accountable for that academic honesty. And then the last thing I do, which seems small, but I think it's really powerful, is to be really, really clear with students what cheating is and what it's not. I think when we provide a lot of gray area for students, some who normally wouldn't tend to kind of shift into that gray area because it wasn't really explicit and they're not really sure if it's cheating or not. So before any assessment, I am super, super specific. If my students are in the classroom, I say things like, if I see your eyes moving from side to side in the room, that will look like cheating. If your eyes need a break, look up at the ceiling or look down at your feet. If I hear you whispering to a student, that seems like cheating. So instead, raise your hand, call me over, and I can tell the person behind you not to kick your chair. So getting super, super clear exactly what your expectations are for assessment. What are you looking for them to do, and what do you not want them to do? And that is a good kind of pausing point in terms of big picture on how to set up this culture and environment to encourage students not to cheat,
de-incentivize cheating, but also maybe encourage some accountability measures. So I'm just going to pause right there and see if there are any questions that I can address before we move on.
Yes, there's a few questions popping up, and a lot of it is having to do with, like, do you have a deadline when you let them redo tests? And then, like, how long does this take you for grading if you're constantly having to, like, review the redos?
Absolutely. So again, just going back to these slides, really addressing a lot of this worry about redoing work. So luckily, currently, I have less students than I've had in the past. So it really doesn't take very much time for me. I typically save all revising and redos for Fridays. So I kind of save those emails where my students, I always ask them to email me before they redo any work. Say, hey, Miss Bass, I'm planning on redoing this. And then Miss Bass, you can now go and regrade this piece of work. So I save all of that for Fridays. I would say it probably takes me an hour or so every Friday to go through revised and redone work. But I also did this with my old school. I had about 200 students. I used to teach 6th grade English in Las Vegas. And it was about the same, about an hour on Friday for revised and redone work. I currently don't have any deadlines on revised or redone work, except for when we're coming to the end of a quarter or the end of a semester where I need to input final grades. Usually a week or two out, I'll say any revised or redone work needs to be done, a week before or 2 weeks before the end of that grading period. And then after those final grades are submitted, typically students don't redo work for that quarter. So you kind of have to do any work for that quarter within that period of time. And then those grades are locked in and set. I definitely would allow students to redo work, all the way from the beginning of the year, but they know that wouldn't affect their grade because those grades have already been entered in.
Right, that makes sense. And another quick question, do you do formative and peer checks during the learning so they revise as they go?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit later about peer revision, but
Okay.
Definitely doing small formative assessment as we go. And yeah, I do allow them to revise formative as well as summative work. So my personal philosophy is they're here to learn, and whether they knew it the first time or the second time doesn't really matter because they know it now. So big fan.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to move on.
Awesome. Okay. So that brings us to some of the tools that you might use for formative and summative traditional assessment online. Again, I'm talking about short answer, multiple choice type tools, and hopefully at this point, you've already set up all of your systems so your students are not cheating at home. They feel empowered to redo their work. They know what cheating is and isn't, and they feel like they're being held accountable. So now we can start to use some of these tools to assess our students with some more confidence that learning is actually coming from them. The first one we're going to talk about is Google Forms. If you do any educational technology work already, you're probably familiar with forms, but you may not be fully familiar with some of the feedback options in forms. So I actually have our first little hand activity now. I have a little Google form quiz for you because we have so many participants. Let's see, maybe we don't have that many today. We have 145. I was expecting a ton, but 145 is still a lot. Sometimes on a Google document, if you get more than 50 or 80 people, it'll start to get a little glitchy. So I've actually created separate forms for groups. So you will see months, and these are the months you were born in. And then below that month, you'll click the link to the form to take this quick form. So I was born in July. From the chat box, I'll click this link. It'll take me to a short Google form. I'll answer these 3 questions, and I would never typically suggest this as a teacher, but get at least 1 question wrong so that you can see what happens after you click submit. You'll see a view score button, And then you'll click that view score button and see the kind of feedback that Google form gives to you.
So I'm going to go ahead and drop those links in the chat box here. I'm going to make sure I'm sending it to all panelists and attendees. Here we go. Oh no, those didn't separate out very well, but hopefully you can still see your month and the link to your form. I'll give everyone about 3 to 4 minutes to take that little quiz, and then I'll tell you to come back to the Zoom window, and we'll move on. Oh, these are all saying invalid links. Okay, scratch that, everybody. I have no idea why they would say invalid. But everyone come back to the Zoom, and I'll delete the emoji. Mine is okay, works for me. Able to access, marked work, mine is okay. Okay, so we're working through some weird tech stuff. Let me see what else I can do here. Separate these out. Same thing. So if your link wasn't working, I would just try a different link. I think we have some that are working and some that aren't. Elizabeth said, I love the embedded feedback when you get the incorrect answer. Awesome. I'm glad you saw that, Elizabeth. August is working. Cool. Lillian, if you look just above where you are in the chat box, you should see from me a whole bunch of text and links. Emma, do you have different quizzes for the initial quiz and the red one? Cheryl, I'm not 100% sure what you mean. Cool. In the chat box, if you could type for me when you are done, so I can see that we're ready to move on and you are back in Zoom. Looking like a bunch of people are done. If you didn't get to the quiz, I'm going to show you what it looks like now so that you can see that. And then there's also links in the slides so you can go back and do that later. But it looks like most people are done with that. So let me just quickly show you what I hope everyone was able to see is that after you clicked that quiz, it was self-graded. There's a automatic feature within Google Forms. So I got 0 out of 3, right, unfortunately. And then it was able to show me which questions I selected that were wrong, the correct answer below that, and then I attached video feedback. So if students need a reminder on that skill, you could ask them to watch a video in order to learn or kind of remind them or review that skill. So I had 3 videos there on Spock and Planet Song in order to give that formative feedback. I will just really quickly demonstrate for you. Let me see that setting within Google Forms, and then I'll also show you where that is in resources in the slides. So when I'm creating a Google Form quiz, I go to my settings wheel at the top right. 3rd tab over allows me to make it a quiz. There's this little option that says make this a quiz. And then once that is attached, you'll see with every question, there is now an answer key option where I can select the correct answers. And below that, an option to add answer feedback. So this is where I clicked just textual feedback for correct answers, like this great pun, you Rockies. Remember, I'm in Colorado, very bad baseball puns. And to the left of that for incorrect answers, I was able to insert a video, or you could also insert a link. So if they get incorrect answers, you might send them to Khan Academy for an activity, right? Do a couple of these practice activities, which is great. Typically, I will use this for formative assessment, asking students to review feedback and then take the exam again until they reach 100%. So using our feedback and then retaking until everybody's at 100%. And that is Google Forms. Oh, and then I mentioned, if you are interested in this later on, you'll see in the notes of my slides down here, I have a link to that Google Form quiz I had you take, so you can always go back from my slides and take it again or look at what I did. And then the second one is a little video on YouTube about how to add that answer feedback from a Google Form quiz. So if you kind of want to self-navigate through that process, that resource is for you. Then another resource I love if you are in the Google universe and using Google Classroom as your learning management system. If you like the Google Forms quiz, but you're actually just asking maybe a bell ringer or do now type question or an exit ticket, there's a feature within Google Classroom called the Google Classroom question. And it allows you to ask just one multiple choice or one short answer question. So I use this feature a lot just because it's all built into Google Classroom, really easy to view and assess. And the short answer question allows students to see each other's responses and reply to them. So you could actually take a short answer question and turn it into a chat room, which I do a lot for discussion.
Then when we're talking about assessment, I'll oftentimes use this tool called Go Formative, particularly for summative assessment. It is a separate website. It's a kind of different platform, and despite the Go and the kind of colorful logo, it's not actually a Google product. It's a third-party product, but it allows you to create assessments online, including multiple choice, short answer, paragraph. There's even some more advanced features for writing out formulas and whiteboards. Really great platform where you can also borrow content from other teachers. So if other teachers have made their assessments public, you can go and borrow answers and questions from other teachers. But what I really love about it is it's live. So if I am having my students all come to Google Meet or come to Zoom to do an assessment live online, I can see in real time as my students work through their assessment. So here's a little video demonstration. All of your students' names are listed there. You can see their progress as they move through, and you can actually see them type in real time. So you can watch them as they write their short answer or paragraph responses, which then would allow you, again, to go and private message students if they need a reminder, if they need help. Another really cool feature of Go Formative is the copy and paste detector. So Go Formative can recognize if anybody has pasted anything into a text box, and it will give you this little exclamation symbol flag to let you know that a student has just pasted work in. And again, then you might go to the private feature and say, hey, I noticed that this looks like it's copy and pasted. Should we paraphrase, or can you cite this piece of work, or however you want to deal with that? The next tool that I love to use is called Quizzes. Quizzes is a multiple choice review style, really fun gamified learning experience. A lot of people are familiar with Kahoot. There's another new tool called Gimkit that's also very similar. And before I explain too much, this is going to be our next little hands-on activity. I'm going to have you play a very short, I think it's just 4-question trivia style quizzes game. So imagine I'm using this at the end of a lesson to review content, or I could be using this at the start of a unit to kind of assess prior understanding and to see where we need to focus on our learning. So I would create this quizzes quiz as your teacher, and then either online during a live synchronous session, or this could be done asynchronously. Students could access this at any point in the day. Students are going on and they are going to this quiz. Quizzes has assured me that up to 500 people can play at a time, so I will be okay with 148. I might do this emoji even though they're cute and fun, because that might have been a problem last time. So I'm going to copy and paste this link into our chat box.
all panelists and attendees. Okay, go ahead and click that link there to play quizzes. It should take you to a site that looks like this, where it asks you for your name. You can put your real name, or you can put a made-up name. I'm seeing a lot of real names, but students are always like just smash of the keyboard letters or something else ridiculous. Middle school students. And I had about 90 people already here. Fantastic. Let's just look at that chat box and make sure everyone's accessing it okay. And I'll paste that link one more time. I'm going to wait until we have 115 people here. If you are not here when we start, don't worry. You can always join once we've already started, but we've got about 115 people here. So go ahead and click start, and we will start the game. Here we go. Got Mark in the lead. With Rita taking the lead and RJ. Kaylee jumping to the top. Overtaken by Derek, and Rita is back up there. Kaylee fighting for number 1, and Leah loves Disney up there too. KB jumping into the leaderboard. Mark still fighting for top spot. We've got Kaylee, Mark, and KB in the last few minutes of our game. When you are done with quizzes, you can scroll down and you can look at your answers. You can see what you've done correctly and what you've done incorrectly. You can do some little self-assessment and review. And then once you're done with that, if everybody can come back to the Zoom and type in the chat box and tell me that you are done, that you are back. I'm seeing some bugging. I can address that in a moment.
Hi, everyone. I think there's a little bit of technical difficulties going on. So I think we'll just wait for Emma to pop back on. There she is.
We thought
Welcome
this
back.
It happens. So we, hopefully everybody was finished with quizzes. I saw most people in the chat box said that they were done. I had a couple questions that I just saw as I was glancing at that about their ranking. That is totally optional as a teacher. You can turn that on or you could turn that off. There's also an option to only see the top 5 ranking. So, so you could turn that on and students would only see if they were in the top 5 of the class or not. So definitely based on your personal philosophy of competition in the classroom, that feature is kind of totally adaptable for you and your students. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Cool. We have last thing, were Mark and KB, and I think Kaylee were at the top, and I gave them some virtual applause. And then as the teacher, you can scroll down from your teacher dashboard,
see the players and how they did. Or what I typically do is I go to review questions, and you can go through all the questions, or you can just identify the most commonly missed questions. And then as a whole class, I'll go over those most commonly missed questions together. So I'll hide those answers, and I'll have students kind of volunteer to talk through what they chose and why. So quizzes, again, is a tool that I really like for formative assessment. And again, either as a review or to understand prior knowledge for students. It's also something that I would consider using at the beginning of the year as a get to know you activity. So having students each write a question about themselves, and then having students play a game of get to know your classmates over quizzes, I think would be a lot of fun. Another one of my very favorite formative assessment tools is Pear Deck. If you have not heard of Pear Deck or have not used Pear Deck, this is probably my #1 favorite educational technology tool. Like most of them, it's what we call a freemium product. So somebody mentioned Go Formative has a free and a paid for version. Quizzes has a free and a paid for version. Almost everything I find ways to just use the free version for.
Pear Deck is the only one that I would highly recommend asking your school or district to spring for the premium version. I would pay for this out of pocket just based on how much I use it and how much I rely on it. What Pear Deck allows you to do is add interactive questions right into your presentation slides. So into this slide deck that I'm using now, this Google slide deck, I can go to my add-ons, Pear Deck, and in this right sidebar over here, I then have the option to make this Pear Deck slide a short answer text question, a multiple choice question, a question where students can draw on the screen. And then when I'm presenting this lesson for my students, they can actually interact and answer those questions as we learn. Again, in my little notes at the bottom of this deck are some resources, demonstration of Pear Deck, and then also a link to their website where they have a lot of tutorials. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in this, going to Pear Deck, watching some more tutorials. But here's just a quick example of how I might use this. If I were doing check-in with my students like I typically do at the start of a class, I could turn this check-in slide into short answer text. You can see over here on the left, this is what the students see. They see the check-in slide on the left-hand side, and then on the right, they have this little text box where they can type in their answers. As the teacher over here in your teacher dashboard, you can see the students' answers again in real time as they type. So I can watch Trisha say she's doing a 3 out of 4 and she likes Harry Potter. And then I can narrate that aloud to the class, and I can say, I see a lot of 3s and 4s today. I love Harry Potter too, et cetera, et cetera. On this next slide where we talked about teaching online synchronously and asynchronously, I might add a draggable option. So over here on the left, my students see this little heart, and then they're asked to drag it to the place where they think they're doing most learning. So here are my participant answers, and you can see they're all somewhere, most of them somewhere in the middle here. You can use this drag and drop feature for students to self-assess understanding, put it on a scale of I'm totally lost to I've totally got this, and check in with them during the lesson. How are you feeling? Are you totally lost? Are you doing pretty good? Or are we ready to move on? This is an example of a multiple choice question. So over here, again, students see the slide, and they also have these 3 multiple choice options. And as the teacher, I can see the responses. If I were in Pear Deck, over any one of these responses would show a drop-down list of which students and what they responded. And then finally, I do this in every single Pear Deck session that I ever do, regardless of the age, regardless of the topic, a 1-minute free creative expression with a totally blank slide. So over here, you can see this blank slide. And then I add the drawing feature so students can just draw, free creative expression, and then I always have them come back to our Zoom or Google Meet, and I project them all for the students so they can all see each other's beautiful creations. But the drawing feature is really powerful for formative assessment as well. You can have them reflect through drawing, right? Draw a picture of X, Y, or Z. Your background could be a map, and you could ask them to label or identify something on the map. Tons of different uses for that drawing feature within Pear Deck. So that's just a quick little demo of what it would look like. I could spend this entire 90-minute session demoing Pear Deck and all the different uses, but this is just a little preview, and I highly recommend digging in a little bit deeper and learning more about Pear Deck because it's a really powerful formative assessment tool. You can see your students' understanding real time as you're teaching. And again, whether this is online or in the classroom and students have their own devices. I use this in the classroom as well. And then you can address any misconceptions or confusions as you go. And you can also celebrate students' understanding as you go. Another great formative assessment tool I use is Edpuzzle, particularly when teaching asynchronously online. If I'm trying to deliver some direct instruction and I'm recording a video of myself, those videos can be a little bit boring to watch, to be honest, right? Students are really used to watching super engaging content online. So one way we can address this is by making sure the students are staying engaged by adding interactive elements into our direct instruction video. Edpuzzle is a platform where you can either upload videos you've created yourself, or you can use videos from the web. So from YouTube, from Khan Academy, from Discovery, there are a bunch of videos already there that you can reuse. Once that video is uploaded to the platform, you can add these interactive questions. So the video will play, it will pause, and then the student will be asked a question that they have to either multiple choice or short answer respond to. So just keeping that hands-on element so that they have to stay engaged in the lesson and complete the entire video. As a teacher on the back end, you can see which students have logged in. You can see how much of the video they've watched by percentage, and you can see those responses. So instead of just posting a video and fingers crossed, hope they watch it, you can upload it to Edpuzzle, or there's other websites like PlayPosit that do this as well, and add those interactive elements. Again, this is another free premium product. I use the free version, and I've never really needed anything more. So our have an example of an Edpuzzle video for you to watch. Fingers crossed this works, but you can just tell me in the chat box if it is acting funny. It's just like a 30-second video to give you an example of how I record a video and add interactive questions to it. So I'm going to go ahead and one more time pop this in our chat box. All panelists and attendees. Oh, looks like I'm posting just Stephanie. Nope. Here we go. Okay. And then we will pause right after this for some more questions. Thank you, Stephanie. I see Cynthia said synchronous or asynchronous. I would definitely use this as asynchronous, right? I would post a link to Edpuzzle for my students on Google Classroom, and then at any point on that asynchronous day, so maybe on a Monday, they go and complete the Edpuzzle video as their work that day. Sarala, you don't need to be able to draw and write for Edpuzzle. You might be asking about Pear Deck, but either way, no, you can just draw or write with a mouse. If there's a drawing feature. Touchscreens are better, but yeah. Alrighty, and when you're done with that Edpuzzle, just come back to the chat box and let me know when you're done, so I know we can move on. Somebody said bad connection. Again, if you're having a bad connection, that link is also in my slides. So you can go back and watch that at a later time when you have better connection. And I'm seeing most people seem done. Erica, I use the free version of Screencastify just because I'm trying not to talk for more than 5 minutes, like directly at a time for my students. But I've been upgraded to premium for COVID. They're doing upgrades for free, which is nice. And Linda, don't worry about that. You can always access the Edpuzzle later when your resources are better. I feel like there might be an issue with too many people accessing it at the same time. So if everyone just wants to come back to the Zoom, I'll just share my screen to show you what this looks like if you weren't able to see. We had a video, as you saw, I recorded this using a screen recording tool called Screencastify. Students watch the video and then you're asked to pause at a few different places to answer some short little interactive questions. Have you used this before? How are you feeling, et cetera, et cetera. So I will take a quick little pause for some questions. I think Stephanie has some compiled.
Yes, so I wanted to ask you, just going back to quizzes, one of the questions from Laura was, how do you find the competitive extrinsic reward nature of quizzes affects student reframing of learning, not just chasing points? And several questions were kind of based on that as well.
Yeah, it definitely is a little counterintuitive to the other philosophy that I propose, that it's more, more about the knowledge and understanding. I would definitely recommend just framing it before doing any highly competitive game as, remember, this is a process of learning. My students are very familiar with the idea that we fail forward and it's through our failure, it's through our mistakes that we learn. So always framing it there first. I actually have a little bell in my classroom I call the fail bell. Whenever anybody makes a big mistake, they can come ring the bell and everyone cheers for them. It's an idea that I got from the Innovator Academy, Google Innovator Academy, which I highly recommend. So framing it as a we fail forward and to not take that to heart before any competitive kind of game-based learning is what I would say.
Oh, yeah, great. No, I appreciate that answer. Another question, just kind of going back to Pear Deck, and this is a simple question. Do teachers and students need to be using Pear Deck at the same time, or can they use that on their own?
Great question. So typically I do use it synchronously because I'm looking at that, that formative assessment in real time, and I find that most valuable. But there is actually an option to create a student-driven lesson in Pear Deck. So you could turn that on and have it actually be an asynchronous lesson where students can go access the content, move through the slides at their own pace, answer the questions, and then the teacher can go back and review it. So either one.
Great, thank you. I think we can move on.
Okay, great. So the last thing I'm going to mention in this chunk, and if you remember, we're all now still talking about traditional assessment styles. So short answer, multiple choice, et cetera, et cetera. I also wanted to mention written responses as a strategy for traditional learning styles. And can we use or encourage more original writing as a part of our assessment? Especially when we're talking about some meta learning. So I'll explain exactly what I mean. Meta learning is that explaining how and why, how you know something and why. So explaining how your understanding of a topic. In this case, used really powerfully in math. We know that you can really quickly pop a math equation into Google, but it might be a little bit more complicated to explain how you know how to get to that answer. So requiring an original written response could be an effective measure for making sure student work is their own. You definitely have to be aware of Google. As I was researching specifically for this question, I found plenty of sites like WebMath that not only can produce a correct answer for you for a math question, but it will also give you through step by step how they solved it. So a student could easily copy and paste this instruction into that written response as their explanation for understanding. So you might also consider using plagiarism checkers in combination with original writing if you are trying to really focus on the accountability and security piece of it. There are numerous plagiarism checkers on the web. All you have to do is Google plagiarism checker and you will find tons that are free and available to use. In my notes, I just have links to 2 from Grammarly and EasyBib because I know those are both pretty reputable sites and I trust those plagiarism checkers. I'll also mention that on Google Classroom, there is a new feature called Originality Reports, where any piece of written work, so if it's on a document, this Originality Report will do a web search of that piece of writing. And then over here, you'll see any piece that looks like it might have been taken from the web is highlighted. It can be clicked. And then in this right-hand column, you'll see a comparison of the student's passage to the top web result with the bold letters being the word for word taken pieces. What I love about Originality Reports is it is available for students to use as well as for teachers. So it's not meant to be like a gotcha tool. It's meant to be a teaching tool. Encourage your students to run plagiarism checkers on themselves. Encourage them to run Originality Reports on their own work so that they can then make those adjustments, cite their sources, paraphrase, and do what they need to do before they turn it in and before it turns into like a caught you type situation, which nobody likes. It's not fun for anybody to catch somebody plagiarizing. So empower your students to check themselves first. Show them the tools so that they know how to use them for their own benefit. I will also mention Originality Reports is a new feature and it is slightly limited. So you only have 3 that you can run within Google Classroom, within any one classroom at a time. So if you have 5 periods, each of those 5 would have 3 reports. So saving this maybe for more summative style assessment. And then I also mentioned that Go formative copy paste detector. So you could create a Go formative for your math homework, have each of the questions be short answer response, and then you would get that little flag if anything were copy and pasted. In summary of these traditional assessment models, that kind of brings me to the end of this section in traditional assessment models. There are so many great online assessment tools that you can use, right? The things we've talked about like Edpuzzle and quizzes and Go formative, right? There are these amazing, amazing tools to use, but only after you set up those systems and cultures that encourage students to do the work genuinely themselves, right? Emphasizing all of what I do to assess you is to help me understand how I can help you better. So please make sure this is coming from yourself. And that brings me to my next official break for questions. I know we paused just a moment ago, but Stephanie, is there anything else I can answer right now?
Yeah, just a couple questions that came up about the originality reports. Does that cost more in Google?
Yeah, so the originality reports within Google Classroom, if you are on a Google for Education account, that's free. And that's what the majority of school districts in the country are using as a free account. You get 3 per classroom. If you want more than 3, your district needs to be on an enterprise for education account, which costs, I think it's like $4 per student or something like that. So your district would need to upgrade to that upgraded Google account, and then you would have unlimited originality reports. Unfortunately, it's not something you can do on an individual or a classroom basis. It would have to be district-wide to get unlimited reports.
Great, thank you. And then another question was, do students have to have individual accounts for all of these websites?
Really good question. No. All of the websites that I've showed you so far have what we call single sign-on. So if your district is using either Google accounts, so if you have Gmail for all of your students, or Microsoft accounts, Each of them has a button that just says log in with Google or log in with Microsoft, and it will immediately pull them with their data through. So it will use their email and their email password for all of those sites. Really fantastic, but it's just something to keep in mind. Remind your students to always click sign in with Google, sign in with Google, sign in with Google.
Right, yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so I think we have about arrived at the end of our session here, and I really appreciate everything. I learned so much today. I think this was great. I tried to do my best to kind of group questions together, but if there are follow-up questions, you know, I'm sure we can answer those too. I wanted to let you all know, those of you who participated today, that Emma will be returning and hosting another webinar for us on July 7th, having to do with engagement. So that'll be really great. So please come back for that. And also, those of you attending, if you have other people that you think would be interested in attending our webinars, you can certainly share the link with them. And they are welcome to join us for our sessions. We're going for the next several weeks here, so we have a lot to offer. And then I would like to ask you, if you attended, to please fill the feedback form out when you get that later today. Again, everything was recorded, and so you will get a link for that. And to Emma's slides as well. Thank you for that. And then just to let you know, if you would like to talk more about this, you can attend our after debrief session right now, which is going to happen in a few moments. It takes Brian and I a few moments to kind of transition over there. But those of you who have been attending, I think they have been a great place for you to kind of process and talk about what you saw and network with each other. And Emma provided some great questions for us. I appreciate that, Emma. So I think that about wraps it up for now. And Emma, we'll see you again July 7th. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I hope to see you in our debrief session.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Take care.